Hi everyone and welcome to Coast Connections. I'm Elizabeth Heinz and tonight this show is for the wild. It's for the wild lands, the waters and all the amazing wildlife that we have here in our coastal region. And to take us on this journey we've got to have the Raincoast Conservation Foundation, which is unique in Canada. It is all science-based conservation. They're empowered by science, peer-based research. And they also are unique in that they have a university lab, they have a research station, and they also are here right on the West Coast to help us save our wonderful coastal areas. So welcome.
Thank you.
Chris Darimont and Ross Dixon, welcome. Thanks for having, Ross came all the way over from Vancouver tonight, so I really appreciate that. So gentlemen, you've been involved since about 1990 with the Raincoast Conservation Foundation. And tell us about how this got started, and what the other element I'm really curious about is what you call informed advocacy, which is unique. So let's talk a little bit about how you got started.
It sure is from the very beginning, Liz, that concept of being advocates for nature, but advocating in a way that's informed. And you've mentioned science. That's at the core of what we do. That informs our communication, our education, the research that we do, and how we express and share knowledge with the public, with policymakers, and so on. So being able to communicate accurately in ways that resonate with policymakers, with the public, is really at the heart of what we try to accomplish.
Wonderful. And you have a wonderful group of scientists, conservationists, photographers, volunteers. It's quite a diverse mix that you've developed there over the last almost 30 years at Raincoast. And we just want to talk a bit about, there was quite an amazing milestone that you reached. As of December 31st, you had raised $500,000 for a project in the Great Bear Rainforest. Tell us a little bit about that and how that money is going to be applied to saving the wild.
Yeah, so that was, it was something we achieved just before the campaign end, and it's a campaign to safeguard coastal carnivores. And it's really like the next step in a puzzle of ending commercial trophy hunting of all large carnivores in the Great Bear Rainforest. So this last December, we reached a milestone of acquiring a 4th commercial hunting tenure. And basically what that means is there's two types of hunting that goes on. Hunters, how they're regulated is different between resident hunters and non-resident hunters. And Raincoast for a long time, really since our inception, when Chris started as well, has been opposed to the trophy hunting of grizzly bears in particular, but really all large carnivores, which is something we've worked on for a long time. And well over a decade ago, we actually won a moratorium on the trophy hunting of grizzly bears. And to be clear, I'm sure Chris will echo that Raincoast, like lots of other people, is not opposed to hunting for sustenance, but we are opposed to trophy hunting, which is really a very small niche within the hunting community. And what Raincoast figured out is that even though we'd won a long time ago a short-term ban on grizzly hunting, when the government changed, so did the ban. So it was only actually in place for a short period. So that led us to thinking perhaps we need a different approach that isn't reliant or at risk of changing political winds. And that's when we figured out that given that people could own the commercial rights, so the rights to take non-residents to hunt wildlife in British Columbia, we decided to see if we could buy some of these licenses ourselves. And in 2005, I believe, we bought our first commercial hunting tenure in the Great Bear Rainforest, which meant that in an area of over 24,000 square kilometres, the only people who could take people to trophy hunt for wildlife if they weren't from British Columbia was Raincoast. Yeah, and we've been developing that strategy over the years, and December was our 4th commercial tenure. It's actually in a place called the Nadia tenure, which is kind of in the heart of Kitasoo Hei territories. And I guess an important part of our work is that we do this in partnership with a network of coastal First Nations. There's a long-term goal of transferring those rights to those nations. And whilst we kind of were really happy to get to the end of the campaign by the end of December, like I said, it's a part of a puzzle, and we're already working to actually raise some monies for the deposit on a 2nd tenure. And our overall goal is basically to buy all the remaining commercial hunting tenures in the Great Bear Rainforest to put a permanent end to commercial trophy hunting in that area.
So you're basically buying up the rights not to kill these animals, is what you're doing.
Essentially, yes. And part of the beauty of it is we still guide clients fulfilling the letter of the law in the Wildlife Act. We take out clients. But instead of shooting these animals with rifles and ending the life of an animal you can't eat, like a wolf or a cougar or a grizzly bear, people are coming away with spectacular photographs. And so the same beautiful individual animal can be shot again and again with a camera. And those images can then inspire other people to think more about their habitat or their food supply and so on. So there's just lots of different additional benefits that have come with this conservation economic solution. We had a willing buyer, and we are the willing buyers, and we had willing sellers. And money was exchanged and everybody's happy. And so we're just delighted. We were the first people to do this, and others have followed on Haida Gwaii and in northern British Columbia. And we see this as one really important piece in the conservation puzzle on the coast. And it was creative, and it took away a large portion of the trophy hunting, and it's working very well. So we anticipate continued success.
What a unique model. And it's nice to know that that is being copied in other parts of the world now. And so the grizzlies, the wolves, the spirit bears, the black bears, what other carnivores?
Mountain lions.
Mountain lions.
Other big game that people are looking for from outside British Columbia, hunters that are there just for the trophy.
Right.
And in fact, they're prohibited to take the meat back home on an animal like a moose, let's say. So this is a win-win for the people of this coast.
I love it. Thank you. And the animals, thank you. And yes, you have a new way of shooting animals, and we have some of your amazing photographs that your Raincoast team of volunteers, because you're a nonprofit charitable organization, some images that your team has taken, and they're world class. So we're going to walk through those in a second. And a lot of these are taken in the Great Bear Rainforest. Let's just remind viewers where that is.
Sure. Great Bear Rainforest, if we drive to the tip of northern Vancouver Island, is kind of that latitude all the way north to the border with southeast Alaska. And we follow it east, the landscape, until the height of the Coast Mountain Range. And if we drew a circle around that area, it's about 60,000 square kilometers. So a massive, largely unroaded, largely unspoiled environment. We don't call it pristine because humans have been there working with the forests, harvesting resources from those forests for millennia. So we avoid the word pristine, but we do like to think of it as an unspoiled landscape by and large, especially as you get towards the central and northern portion of that coast.
Right, yeah. Let's check out some of these photos here. And the biodiversity there is so unique too. It's unique in the world, the biodiversity there. 6 million different kind of migratory birds come through there. What did I read? 2,500 salmon runs?
That's about right. That's right. This is the only place where black bears come in white, where we say wolves of the sea, and it can mean two different things. We have the killer whales, the northern resident killer whales up there, and the transients, but we also have wolves that swim among islands and eat salmon. So we kind of have two wolves of the sea. It's incredible migratory flyway for birds, lots of very important, highly productive estuaries for them to stop and refuel on their voyages north and south. And it's still a stronghold for salmon. Wonderful,
wonderful. So let's show a couple of these bear pictures that I think we've got. Dax, you want to just cue those up? There we go. Look at this beautiful grizzly. Oh my goodness. How is that a male or female, or do we know there? How old do you think that one might be?
hard to tell. It's kind of a middle-aged bear at least. I suspect this was on one of our expeditions into the area, taking clients with cameras to shoot this bear, not with a bullet, but with a camera.
Yes.
And that bear is situated in a gorgeous backdrop of temperate rainforest at the mouth of a salmon river, and in an area where it's still a stronghold for animals like this.
Yeah.
The grizzly bears used to roam over most of North America, and they have been extirpated and will never come back to many parts of this continent. So we need to remember that history and help us understand how valuable a place like this is.
And preserve it for future generations and for the wildlife and the wild.
That's
out
right.
there. Exactly.
That's right.
And what's we've got killer whale?
Yeah, so I guess killer whales are like a key part of our conservation work now. And like I'm sure lots of you viewers will see. I guess there's different types, and what Raincoast focuses a lot on right now is the southern resident population of killer whales, which are critically endangered. There's actually only 74 individuals left. So we've spent a lot of time over the last year taking the federal government to task to push them to take the steps necessary, and sometimes what we might call drastic measures with regards to things that are controversial, like fisheries closures and restrictions on whale watching, and improvements in how we reduce disturbance from vessel traffic. But for a species that is really iconic culturally in lots of other ways, and it kind of part of the reason it's similar to grizzly bears as an umbrella species. Southern residents are another top predator of the ocean, and we don't just focus on these species because they're iconic, but as science and ecological principles tell us that if we protect these top predators, then we're actually protecting a lot of all the other species in which they rely, like wild salmon, and even then the prey base of wild salmon, like things like herring and so on and so forth. So southern resident killer whales are a real, I think you could say, an international species of concern. So we see a lot of effort in Washington state, where the governor's recently asked for $1 billion US, specifically focused on the recovery of the southern resident killer whales.
Wow.
And Raincoast is advocating for significant efforts here in Canada and British Columbia that we can actually hopefully shift this population in a different direction. We submitted a lot of evidence actually for the hearings, National Energy Board hearings for the Kinder Morgan proposal. And a key part of the evidence that we submitted there was a population viability assessment, which basically is a conservation planning tool that tells you, well, what are your options and what can you do, and how does that impact the population? And whilst it tells us that they can't sustain additional pressures, it does tell us that if we actually make more of their food available, which is Chinook salmon, and we decrease disturbance, so things like recreational vessels and large commercial vessels, the science tells us that we can put them on a trajectory towards recovery.
How encouraging.
Yeah, we think so. Yeah, it's going to take some pretty drastic measures, like we mentioned. Like we're advocating for closures of marine, recreational, commercial Chinook fisheries until we can put this population onto a trajectory towards recovery. And I guess
they're starving. They're starving,
yeah, exactly.
literally. So we need to be doing that. I mean, to give them any chance at all. And I like that it's international cooperation with the U.S. and Washington State putting in $1 billion toward this. And hopefully, we'll step up a little more too and save this amazing species. Yeah. There's a correlation between orcas and meerkats in terms of saving the southern residents and looking at meerkats. What do you know about that, Chris?
Well, personally, I'm just learning myself, but we have a colleague named Andrew Bateman, who's a postdoctoral researcher in our lab at the University of Victoria. And during his PhD at Cambridge, he studied this African social animal that seems about 1 million miles away, literally and figuratively, to our resident killer whales.
Yeah.
However, they are similarly social in that when we think about the population, and in particular, how the population might grow or decline over time. What happens within social groups can be really enormously influential. So Dr. Bateman was taking what he has learned about those African mammals and thinking about how these sort of approaches, mathematical generally, can be applied to thinking about the conservation of resident killer whales. We might, for example, and this work is ongoing, gain a better understanding about more targeted intervention. There may be, for example, some family groups that we would be wise to target in terms of supplying food to, minimizing disturbance to, because those family groups might be particularly important to the population growth rate as a whole. So a really lovely way of taking a highly sophisticated mathematical approach that was developed in one system and bringing that tool set to another system in which we really do need new ideas. We need refined information, and more to what Ross says, we need the political will to act on conservation measures. Largely, we know what to do for southern resident killer whales. There's a little more science to be done, for sure, but largely part of our job and colleagues at Raincoast, especially Misty McDuffie, is to lobby on behalf of these killer whales, to be in those meetings with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, to interact with whale watchers, with the shipping community. We are compelled to act as formal interveners in National Energy Board processes, in particular the ones related to the Kinder Morgan expansion, which these killer whales cannot withstand. This is not what we should be doing to the Salish Sea at this time for killer whales, at any time, quite frankly. This is similarly, 5 years ago, we were interveners, formal interveners and expert witnesses before the Joint Review Panel on the Enbridge proposal. This is a big part of what we do to take the information and have it become valuable at the decision-making environmental impact assessment table. So we invest an enormous amount of energy, blood, sweat, and tears in those processes. But equally important, we need to share what we know and what we believe to be some solutions to the public, so the public can demand of decision makers better decisions for creatures like resident killer whales.
And what I like about Raincoast is the fact that this is all scientifically based. It's peer-reviewed science that you're conducting, and the science goes toward building policy, which is, you have to make those changes at a really grassroots level like that in order to get the engines of change going. So with being empowered with science, you're helping to make these changes.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about your research lab at UVic.
Sure. We're enormously privileged to be also in the university system. I'm a professor at the University of Victoria too. But longer I've been a Raincoaster, as we say. And our graduate students and postdocs and even undergraduates in our lab wear Raincoast hats too. They want to be there for their education and to learn how to do science and to interact with the peer review system and become scholars. But that alone isn't enough for them. What they want to do is applied work that's going to impact policy, work that's going to inspire the public. Working with communities is very important to us. Working with youth in the context of youth education. These are all things that graduate students typically don't do, but they do at the Raincoast Lab, and we're enormously proud of our ability to deliver this rich set of opportunities for these students who can contribute so much to these issues we're talking about today as scholars and practitioners and quite frankly, agents of change.
Yes, you're building leaders for tomorrow. And you're also doing that on board one of your very unique research vessels called the Achiever, which is aptly named. And that's another unique feature of Raincoast Conservation is your floating research vessel. Tell us a little bit about that.
So she is called Achiever.
She.
Our captain, our colleagues Brian Faulkner and Nick Sinclair would correct me pretty quickly on that. And it is a key part of Raincoast in terms of being able to access these places, but also being able to conduct the science that informs, just like Chris was talking about, decision making. So part of the reason we actually bought the vessel in the first place, which is certified and designed to support marine research, is to conduct surveys of marine mammals and marine birds on the central coast of British Columbia. This was in anticipation actually of the Enbridge Northern Gateway proposal. So by the time that proposal, and we can't say we anticipated Enbridge's proposal, but we could anticipate oil and gas development on the coast. And by the time that came around, we were able to submit an evidence and use elsewhere and actually empower different nations who this was affecting directly.
Yes.
With over 5 years and 24,000 nautical miles of transects and multiple research papers that actually informed the proponent as well, people like Enbridge, to say this is actually the risk to marine mammals and marine birds, because at the time it was the most extensive study of its kind on the coast of British Columbia. So the reason we have it is to enable that type of research. And since that time we've found, I think, credit, and I'd raise my hands to people like Jess Housty of the Heldsick First Nation. We've also been invited to support them with youth education at their Quay camp that's led by their charity of the Heldsick Nation called Cooks, which I think means eyes, and it's about cultural education for the youth, where they learn and teach others about stewardship of their natural environment and the traditional laws and ways of knowing about place. Which is really something that we've taken at heart, and like Chris was saying before, really learnt from like that cultural practice of stewardship that's really at the heart of nations like the Heldsick and many others. And what we've done is to bring that concept of consilience partly, so this idea of also looking at different ways of knowing and different ways of learning. So we take a Western scientific approach really to prove things that many people in community have already known for a long time.
For thousands of years.
Yeah, literally,
Yes.
and know and learn in an oral history and many other ways. And we've now, in the last few years, begun to take that program further south into this area, southern Vancouver Island and the Salish Sea, what we call this Emerging Stewards program. So the idea is the same, or the principles are the same. And here we work again with Indigenous youth and at-risk youth, so youth who might not otherwise have the opportunity to experience these types of things, but may well be interested in the natural environment and stewardship and vocations that might be different from ones that they're studying, that might involve them not being at the desk all day. Wow. So we use Achiever as a platform to educate them about conservation issues and give them what is, for many, and we know this directly by their reporting back to us, like transformative experiences where they're perhaps seeing for the first time a killer whale, or seeing for the first time, and we actually did this with youth from some of the parts of Indigenous youth from southern Vancouver Island, including Saanich Nations and others, Sayout Nation, were actually for the first time seeing things like humpback whales in the traditional territories, which is really quite a profound experience. Not just, I actually wasn't there, but I can speak for my colleagues that were, like, not just for the students, but for everyone there. And that's, I think, like, being able to support those kinds of connections with things like Achievers really allows us, as Chris said, in a privileged way to learn from those youth, especially Indigenous youth who often we find are teaching us a lot more than we're teaching them about the places in which we live. And then through the program, we're also able to bring them together with other youth from the local environment to give them an experience and give them different ways of knowing and learning about stewardship, with the hope that I guess you'd say they continue to advocate for wildlife on BC's coast.
That's very profound and very, I just love the multi-cultural approach, the multi-generational approach. That's building a really, really strong foundation for future activity.
Yeah.
That's just really commendable. And that's another thing that's unique to the Raincoast Foundation. And I might add, like acquiring that vessel, you are a non-profit charitable organization.
Right.
So this was all done by sponsors and generous donations, big and small, from all over.
Yes.
So that's a tremendous accomplishment in itself.
Yeah, we really feel fortunate in that over the years we've been able to attract some really important long-term investors. They're donors, to be sure, but we conceive of this as these resources as investments into this coast, into students, into youth from coastal communities, and the people that are generous, we often take them aboard Achiever or share with them experiences and stories about how their investments have transformed the lives of people or have played a role, for example, in stopping Enbridge from potentially wrecking this precious coastline. So we're really lucky to have attracted some really important members of the Raincoast family, so to speak, that have been generous.
That's fantastic. And you know, your motto is investigate, inform, and inspire. And you know, you're investigating through science, you're informing through all kinds of different channels that you have, including a research station up at Campbell Island, I think, which is the entrance to the Great Bear Rainforest, that area?
It's towards the southern part of the Central Coast. It's in the heart of Heltzick territory, in the village of Bella Bella. We have a beautiful rustic float home that serves as our mighty field station. And that's another thing that distinguishes us from many other nonprofits that may have their centers down in urban environments. We have one of those too out in Sydney. But a lot of us spend a lot of time up coast and in communities, and either on Achiever or at our field station in Heltzick territory, and which helps us understand what issues are important to people of this coast, to the Indigenous communities up there, who, since our inception as an organization, we've recognized to be the rightful title holders to these landscapes and seascapes. And it is really exciting and really complex and really wonderful to be witness to this resurgence of Indigenous-led conservation initiatives on this coast. And we are often involved in their efforts by invitation, and as Ross referred to in the educational domain also applies to this. We learn, I think, much more than we even bring to these joint efforts.
And we have learned a lot tonight too about how you investigate, inform, and inspire about nature and people and place. And I just want to thank you for the efforts that you're making there at Raincoast in your almost 30th year. Continued success, and thank you for what you are doing for the wild here in our beautiful coastal region. We really appreciate that, and all the best.
Thanks
Let's
so
hear it for
much.
the wolves and the bears and the coyotes and all the other good wild creatures out there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Liz. And raincoast.org is a wonderful website to share.
For anybody who wants to get a board on the Achiever, maybe there's an opportunity there. They can apply through that.
Absolutely.
So thank you for joining us here on Coast Connections. We really appreciated you being with us tonight, and we will see you next time.